This episode is presented by EE. Marina, are you hosting or guesting for Christmas this year?
Normally, every other year, I am a very grateful guest, but I'm now a slightly trepidatious host. Yes, it is me in the apron having a meltdown over all the cooking. No, I don't think I'll have a meltdown. It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you have to just keep saying to yourself, it's just a big chicken.
Just a big chicken.
Just a really big chicken. It's just a really enormous chicken.
We are also hosting this year. Looking forward to it very much. If you are hosting, then EE has the best broadband technology. If you are guesting, then EE has the best mobile technology. And my goodness, you need it at Christmas, right?
Yes. The third babysitter, the distractor.
Just when the family walk into the house, it's hello grandma, hello granddad, what's the Wi-Fi password?
I might need that.
Yeah. Get the best connectivity for your home and your phone with EE.
And if you're guesting, lucky you, EE has the best mobile network to keep you connected to music, maps and backseat streaming for the kids when you're travelling.
Search EE does more.
Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. Hello, everyone. Hey, Marina.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm all right. How has your week been since I saw you last?
It's getting crazy Christmas busy.
It's good. Do you know what? It's getting crazy Christmas busy.
I believe somebody had a birthday, so now we're allowed to talk about Christmas.
We are allowed to talk about Christmas, exactly.
Thank God, we've had permission.
I am now 55 years young and Christmas ready.
Yeah.
That's so old, isn't it? And talking of Christmas, who are we interviewing next week?
Simon Cowell.
We are indeed. So if you have any questions for Simon Cowell, and I'm sure you do, please send them to therestisенtertainment@goalhanger.com. You can ask him about anything from his long and varied career. What was he thinking with Red or Black? For example, that would just be my listen. I don't want to throw questions out there, but very much looking forward.
I've got a number of questions. Anyway, do join us for that. Now, what are we going to be talking about this week?
Oh, and occasionally a story comes along, and you think, well, this has got our name written all over it. And of course, that story is that they're finally making Rush Hour 4, mainly because Donald Trump has personally intervened and told them to do it. So you think there's a lot of meat on that bone for us, I think.
So let's gnaw on that.
And a lot of characters
shortly.
in that we have a lot to say about.
A lot of our problematic faves in there. We're also going to talk about Stranger Things, which I believe crashed Netflix when it came out last week. And we're going to talk about the kind of Enormo franchise. It's almost 10 years since this first season aired. Where does it all go now? We're also going to be talking about Tom Stoppard, the extraordinary playwright who died this weekend. He meant like everything to me. So I feel that there's so much to talk about.
And in the same way I know that Tom Stoppard meant a great deal to you, I'm like that with Chris Tucker, which brings us to Rush Hour 4.
Well, this is the story of Rush Hour 4. Paramount, which has been newly acquired by the world's richest man, Larry Ellison, and his son, Kendall. I'm so sorry. I mean, of course, David Ellison, has agreed to release Rush Hour 4, which hasn't yet been made, but we'll get to that. You'll remember Rush Hour, the buddy cop franchise, starring Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker.
And Chris Tucker, described by Variety, and I would agree with this, as formulaic but raucously entertaining. Particularly the first couple.
They were all directed by Brett Ratner. And I hear you saying, well, hang on a second, isn't Brett cancelled?
Surely a cancelled man hasn't become uncancelled.
Yeah. Do you know, there's a lot of it about.
Wow. Should we retire the phrase cancelled and call people postponed?
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Like a football match that's been snowed off. Hereford v Newcastle United has been postponed. It will now be replayed next Tuesday. Brett Ratner has been postponed. He will be making Rush Hour 4 in a couple of years.
If we can go back to the causes of his postponement,
yes.
He was accused by multiple women of sexual assault in the 2017, in the first wave of Me Too. And there were a couple of legal actions. And in the end, he went to Israel and he said he was never coming back to America. He's big friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. There also seem to be a number of deals in percolation with the Saudis. So he had a sort of equal opportunities Middle East strategy. But he has been desperately trying to, despite having sort of thought there was no way back. I mean, a lot of people have sensed the world has turned a little bit. And he's been desperately trying to get himself uncancelled. He pulled off a masterstroke. He has directed...
I mean, this is by the way,
this
is, as you say, the world seemed to shift a little bit when Trump was re-elected, and an awful lot of people in an awful lot of industries, not just entertainment, are doing everything they can to try and ingratiate themselves with Trump because they know there's an almost immediate kickback. It's very transactional, his relationships with people. And Ratner is thinking, how do I get in with Donald Trump? I mean, I'm certainly I'm someone that I know he would like. I move in kind of circles that he would appreciate. But he thinks I need a masterstroke to really get my feet under the table with the Trumps. And so he...
So he really found one. You're so right. It's so cynical. He has directed a documentary about Melania, which covers post-2024 election and the sort of transition to her second term as First Lady in the White House. Amazon have paid $40 million for this documentary, which is an absolutely nuts price for a documentary. I mean, nuts beyond.
It's almost like they're paying for something else. I'm not suggesting they are.
Oh my God, because I love Jeff Bezos, and I know that he's a stand-up guy, and so
perhaps it's, you know what, we haven't seen it. Perhaps it's like amazing. Perhaps Bezos is in his office and someone brings in the Melania doc, and he's like, yeah, listen, we could purchase a Melania doc if you can. What would it be, 150 grand, 200? And then he watches it. And he goes, I have to take this off the table for anyone else. This is the greatest documentary I have ever seen in my life. Why don't you offer them 40 million?
40 million. Yeah, it's a real Dr. Evil number. Anyway, $40 million has been offered. They gave Brett Ratner apparently an 8-bedroom house at Mar-a-Lago. There's a load of other property. Even that little detail was like, hang on a second. Wow. I just really need to see an absolute aerial of this place and understand where everything goes. But they gave him an 8-bedroom house at Mar-a-Lago. Apparently Melania, who's, I mean, let's face it, never been any friend to the sisters, liked the fact that he was cancelled. I mean...
Postponed,
I'm so sorry. Liked the fact that he was postponed and sort of had been cast out temporarily. And they shot for something like 30 days. And as I say, it's about this kind of transitional period. It's going to get a brief theatrical release, which, as we know, Amazon doesn't always do. But for this, obviously, for this
for some reason,
property,
again, Bezos has seen it. We haven't. So he's in a position of power. We're not. It's.
Oh, I don't think he's seen it. Why would you bother? I don't think it's about watching the documentary. So in the States, definitely less so here, but in the States, Me Too is being so rolled back. It's sort of extraordinary that Harvey Weinstein will obviously stay in prison it's very difficult to say anyone is sort of permanently cancelled. To give you these kind of, it's like they're captive miscreants being released back into the wild, like sort of Free Willy, but for sex cases or domestic violence cases. So
which we'd have to call Free Willy.
Yeah, which we'd have to call Free Willy. So you've got Louis C.K. He was the 5th highest grossing comedian in October. He made $1.7 million in October.
Wow, with the emphasis on grossing.
Yeah, yeah. Chris Brown, again, number one grossing, super gross. He's the most number one musical act in the world in October. 46 million
for
7 shows. Yeah, because I mean, you sell nearly 300,000 tickets, and nobody remembers that he beat up Rihanna apparently, or maybe doesn't care about it. The Amazon documentary is quite interesting because almost all the top executives who are going to have to market and release this documentary are women. At Amazon particularly, and I think they're generally sort of regarded to be kind of quite good eggs. They will not like this one bit.
That's not fun.
You've anything for the Donald.
It's certainly very good news that they don't release the sort of detailed statistics as to how well things do.
You can bury it in the prime data that you're never going to see. It's interesting. The relationship between Trump and Ratner goes back quite a long time. Brett Ratner directed a film called Tower Heist, which was originally going to be called Trump Heist.
I know.
That's mad, isn't it?
Absolutely mad. So it's Tower Heist is a heist in a big skyscraper. As Ben Stiller and Eddie Murphy. And
every comedian was in or out of this movie over the development period. Everyone.
Sounds like a great idea. It's actually quite a disappointing movie. But yes, originally it was written as, and Eddie Murphy was on board when it was Trump Heist. Yeah. And the whole idea of the thing was Trump's employees are so mad at him that they pull off a heist in Trump Tower.
By the way, he was fine with it, which I find sort of incredible. I guess the portrayal of just giant mogul.
Yeah.
He's not going to worry about the details.
I'm showing I've got a tower. I'm showing I'm the Nakatomi of New York. So Brett Ratner directed that. It was supposed to be Trump Heist, turned into Tower Heist.
Brett Ratner said it would have been a bigger hit if they kept the name.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, and Trump would, I'm sure, say, if my name had still been on the ratings, as he calls anything, would be better.
I think also it would have been a bigger hit if it had been better.
Yeah, Yeah, the movie, I've seen it and it's not very
It's
good.
really not good.
Trump did lease them a lot of buildings, and I think everything that's in that film is filmed in kind of Trump New York properties, so I'm sure he did quite well out of it, as so often. This deal that he's trying to push is for Paramount to release Rush Hour 4, which, as I say, hasn't yet been made. Can I just say, can we talk about the two stars? Chris Tucker is now 54. Jackie Chan is 71. But look, listen, that's the gerontocracy in action. And why shouldn't he be an action movie star?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe lose the word rush. Can I set you a very quick quiz for you and for our listeners at home? Knowing everything you do so far about Rush Hour 4 and what's happening around it, Chris Tucker, do we think he played the Riyadh Comedy Festival or didn't play the Riyadh Comedy Festival?
I think he played it, Richard.
He did indeed.
He
yes,
did.
Of course he did.
Well, he hasn't headlined a movie since probably the last one.
No, he really hasn't had a big hit movie since then. His comedy career is still going great. Yeah. But he played Riyadh Comedy Fest. He was good pals with Michael Jackson. He was on the Epstein plane with Clinton and Spacey. So he's ticking a lot of boxes there. Yeah, I would say.
Paramount will release it, but somebody's actually got to make this movie and finance it. And obviously, it's been shopped around many times before Rush Hour 4, because it's a long time since the last one. And maybe they're saying Warner's, which, if you remember in our endless M&A quest, is the next target for the Ellisons to buy and put together with Paramount. So maybe Warner's will finance the movie. It's not clear, but again, you can see how that could
But
be
someone's going to.
Someone's got to approve the Warner's purchase if it happens, Richard. And somebody's going to need another sweetener for that. So it's interesting. What is Trump doing? Because who cares about Rush Hour 4? Is it just like a favour his friend? What's he doing in entertainment? We know he wants to destroy late night. He's obviously successfully managed to get something happen to Jimmy Kimmel, have him taken off air temporarily, and people say that the cancellation of the Colbert was to do with getting that Paramount deal over the line. We know he's made massive attacks on Seth Meyers, all of them really. So we know he's at war with that. We know he is mounting an ongoing assault on news. I don't know if you saw this, but last week, the new thing has appeared on the White House official website, which is a sort of visual and a graphic and a chart called Media Offender of the Week, in which they call out news organisations for supposed misreporting of him, media bias, etc. And I mean, anyone can be on it. Even CBS News, which is part of Paramount and is now widely believed to be sort of tacking much closer to him as a sort of force in news media, was named last week as having overstepped that. I can't remember what they'd done wrong. Okay, so this is obviously fictional entertainment, but if you think of Rush Hour 4 as a vibe, it's like it's an uncomplicated, non-woke action movie. And it slightly reminded me, all of this, because I went back and I was like reading about Hollywood in the 1940s. And I was like, this is a bit like America during the war, where all the studios were kind of co-opted and in Americanism, you had to make sort of a certain amount of patriotic films. And some of the stories are hilarious. I've probably told this one on the podcast before, in which case, sorry, but Jack Warner at Warner Brothers, they were all made a sort of lieutenant colonel in the army, even though they were working on their lots in Hollywood. Jack Warner was like, well, where's my uniform? They said, yeah, obviously it doesn't come with a uniform. It's kind of an honorary title. So he got the wardrobe department to knock him up a uniform, which he wore all the time around the lot. And when an actual more senior officer in the American military came and visited it, they said to Jack Warner, actually, you should have saluted me. Warner was so angry, he never wore the uniform again.
Wow.
I love.
What it reminds me of more than anything, you would not be shocked, for example, this is 100% a news story that we would mock till the ends of time, that North Korea have decided to fund and remake Under Siege 4 with Steven Seagal.
Yes.
100%, that's the sort of thing that they would absolutely do. Just say that, that we're going to have a huge hit with this.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know why Putin hasn't got
4.
into it myself, because he certainly got lots of the actors. He's got Depardieu now, hasn't he? He's definitely got Seagal. There's quite a lot of people are resident there, but
yeah, if Putin decides to do Police Academy Mission to Moscow 2,
which I would certainly watch.
Brackets get me Gutenberg.
To go back to my point about that thing of America, of Hollywood during the war, I think that Trump sees the culture war like that, but that the enemies are within. And so he is, I definitely can see a world in which he is demanding certain things like this. And it's not just a sort of favour for my postponed friend. It's it's actually more of a strategy because, so in that way, the idea of the sort of, it reminds me much more in some ways of the sort of Red Scare and that trying to root out a kind of, a kind of corrosive and secretive influence, which, woke culture, whatever it is in Hollywood. And it reminds me much more of that. But I do think that he has quite clear cultural plans now, and it's quite difficult to avoid saying that he hasn't when you think of the attack on news, late night, and things like this, which are so sort of extraordinary that it's not difficult to extrapolate and think that there is actually method to the madness.
Yeah, a part of me is glad that this is where he's spending his energy.
There's a lot of other really bad things he could do that would not be Rush Hour 4 would not be as bad as.
But also, when it comes out, he has a lot at stake there. He needs that to open big, and he needs it immediately for Rush Hour 5 to be announced.
Well, it will. Rush Hour 5. I mean, Jackie Chan, how old?
Rush Hour 9 to 5.
Yeah. But he could push it. You can push it, as we've seen in lots of faith-based filming. There are ways that if people feel they have to turn out because it's about something different than just like, do I want to see this thing or not? If they feel there's some sort of moral or quasi-moral obligation to see this, it will be interesting to see what the Melania documentary does. I mean, I think that's a harder sell than this, but you can definitely see that this could be pushed. Anyway, I do think he has cultural plans that we don't really talk about quite
he
so
definitely
much
has.
about.
But I think I genuinely think there is a distinction between interfering with news, and I would include satire in that, and this side of things, which is forever there's been like ridiculous rich people with money who've tried to put films on. I mean, that's the whole history of Hollywood is that. And that I don't mind. Put on whatever film you want because there'll always be other amazing films alongside it. Dismantling the structure of network news and of cable news, that is a genuine harbinger of something very dark. This I prefer.
This is less bad, definitely.
Yeah, poor Jackie Chan sort of getting a call saying, we need you for Rush Hour 4, and him going, oh, God, I really don't want to do Rush Hour 4. And then the money keeps going up and up and up, and he goes, all right, okay, I'll do it. I loved his quote on the first one, which is, he said, I don't like the way I speak English, and I didn't understand anything Chris Tucker said. Jackie Chan is so successful and so rich and so popular that he's sort of uncoachable. He'll say whatever he wants at any given time. So I look forward to his comments on this. Yeah, I look forward to the press tour very much.
Dying for the press tour.
Yeah. What I didn't realise was that I sort of knew in the back of my head that Ratner started out making videos for Public Enemy.
Yeah.
That's where he started, and Wu-Tang and LL Cool J, and then he moved on to Madonna and Mariah and stuff like that. But that's that's how he got his break into the movie business. The other story, I think maybe we did it on a bonus episode because I was looking at the Rotten Tomato scores of the first 3 Rush Hour movies, which, by the way, all of which did very well, all of which did over $250 million. So they're big movies.
In those days, money. So yeah.
Exactly. And, the Rotten Tomatoes scores are not bad. But I forgot that Rotten Tomatoes only exists because of Rush Hour, which is Rotten Tomatoes was set up by that guy, Sen Duong, who was a huge Jackie Chan fan and would rank his movies. And when Rush Hour came out, he went, oh, no, I need to standardize how this works. So he set up Rotten Tomatoes just so he could rank Rush Hour. And now, he thought that it would become quite so culturally central to everything that happens.
Anything can happen in the current timeline.
Yeah, it sure can.
Anyway, speaking of timelines, after the break, we will be delving into the universe of Stranger Things, which jumps back and forward.
And also paying tribute to the great Tom Stoppard. Welcome back, everybody. Now, Stranger Things, biggest show in the world, probably the most profitable show in the world as well. Its final season is now well underway. Marina, I have never seen a single second of Stranger Things. I have never got involved because you're either both feet in or you're nothing. But
I'm shoulder deep, and I can give you a rough overview, and anyone else.
Excellent.
Okay,
you're going to give me a masterclass.
I'm going to give you a very brief précis because it's, and then we can.
Sorry, I didn't mean a masterclass. Just like
I can't give a masterclass on anything.
A half-assed précis.
Yeah, half-assed précis.
Yeah.
It's set in Hawkins, Indiana, which is a sort of anywhere USA town, and there's some little geek. Well, they were quite young at the very start of it, and we'll get to all that. Geeks at school, but strange things are afoot. A shaven-headed girl escapes from a lab. There's a missing boy. This is all in the first season. And then we get the emergence of this sort of parallel world, the Upside Down. And we discover that the US military originally sort of opened, once again, have made one of their bishes and opened the gate to this world.
Guys.
And have been sort of managing the problem secretly. And malign elements from that world, or who've crossed over from that world into our world, seek to sort of disrupt. We don't know. All of these ends will presumably be tied up. But
so it's got that sort of Spielberg-y Stephen King sort of thing of small-town America multiplied by...
It's not even got that sort of thing. It is an unbelievably detailed homage to that. There's, if you think about E.T. and the basement and all of those things, I mean, it really is beyond a tribute, really. And that whole aesthetic, it just hit right. And I mean, the first one came out in 2016, the first season, and I suppose we do live in an era of intense sort of nostalgia and retreading things. And it's interesting, the Duffer brothers who created it, who are twins, who created this, it was retro to them. They didn't live during that time. And then
that's why it can be an homage, I think. It's not ripping something off. It is literally in the same way that, directors from our generation would make Westerns. Yes. It's like this is something that I've grown, an aesthetic which I want to play with.
Which has sort of metamorphosed that aesthetic, exactly. Westerns now seem quite sort of left field, whereas before they were the mainstream. Geek culture, which this show delves right into, has sort of become cool. Yeah. And it definitely helps with the kind of multi-generational thing if you've got, I don't know, parents who might think, oh my God, yes, I remember all this. I remember watching shows like this. I lived through this. Yep. It was very bingeable. It had these great cliffhangers. And it had kind of really timeless themes like kids knowing best and adults not really getting it, and outsiders. But also, I think, trauma, which I do think is particularly, I think they've talked a lot about it being really about, untreated and unacknowledged trauma. Yeah. And that is definitely something more of our age than other things. But in terms of what it's done for Netflix, like you said,
I mean,
people say that it's made them $1 billion. I would put it at almost double that.
I saw the number $1 billion and I thought, I mean, start at $1 billion and go up. I mean, even the play has made... hundreds of millions.
Stranger Things, The First Shadow, which opened in London and then is now on Broadway as well. They say it's brought 2 million new subscribers. I would have thought, I don't know, I would have thought a lot more. And the merchandise is obviously very popular. But it's a lot about retention, and you see that in their release schedule for these things now. Because, of course, what people used to do when things like they thought, oh, I'm not going to have, now a lot more people have Netflix. But at the time they thought, I'll get Netflix, I will watch Stranger Things in one go, and then I will get rid of my subscription. That's what they call churn. Yeah. And the way they sort of drop it in 4 episodes, and then there'll be another wait, and then you'll get another 4. So it really helps with retention. So you can see what it's given them, and it has become just this enormous behemoth. And I mean, I was reading about their salaries for the final. I find this quite... I'm not sure I've agreed with this.
Certainly compared to the first, what...
Yeah, the salaries for the final, Winona Ryder and David Harbour, who were the sort of adults, getting $9.5 million. The kids, as we would call them the kids, but we'll get to the age problem
They're
in a
now
minute.
sort of Jackie Chan age.
Yeah, they're on 7 million. The kind of young adults like Nancy and Steve and Robin and Jonathan, they're on 6 million. Millie Bobby Brown, who plays 11, the original shaven-haired girl who escaped from the lab, she has a separate deal. Yes. We don't even... She has a deal with Netflix. She's really interesting, and this is a whole new... This is very specific. She is a massive star on Netflix. If she does a movie, if she does like one of her Enola Holmes ones, or she does The Electric State, which she did with the Russo brothers, all of those are enormous on Netflix. So she is a huge star on Netflix. I really question whether she could open a movie in cinemas.
But she doesn't need to.
But why? Exactly.
If you can open a show on Netflix, that's all you need to do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But nonetheless, the Duffer brothers who created this, and you'd think, it became this enormous show and this massive kind of cultural phenomenon. They are going to Paramount. They have Netflix offered even more money than Paramount offered, but they decided to leave because they want to make theatrical movies, which you can't really do at Netflix.
Did somebody say Rush Hour 5?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they'd be at least in the mix. Nice to be considered. In terms of there's lots of interesting things about. First of all, what does Netflix do now? You just can't replace something like this. They do have the rights, I think, to spin-off universe stuff which the Duffers can't take to Paramount.
Yeah.
And I suppose what you always want to do with something like this is what Star Wars or Marvel do, which is you kind of keep the franchise alive in some way or another so that it can constantly be producing for you. Maybe that will work for them. But there is a sort of sense that, and they have lots of big creators, but I wonder, in terms of what particularly works and what these big hit shows are, these kind of teen ensembles, I think, work. If you look at Wednesday, Wednesday's another big thing for them. Obviously Squid Game, but that's finished. You don't know when. I think that teen ensemble format, that the sense of spectacle, things that you might have previously only seen in movies, which, these huge special effects, and world building, very, very immersive world building, which is what particularly you have on something like Wednesday or on this. So one thing I do think has been problematic, and this is just, everybody says this, and we've talked about it before on the podcast, but I do think it's significant, is the sheer gaps between the seasons of these TV shows. Game of Thrones was the last show to religiously release a series at about the same time every single year. And they did it for, whatever it was, 8 or 10 years. Wednesday, that was 2.5 years between the seasons. Euphoria, which has yet to come back, is going to be 4 years.
Wow.
Stranger Things was a very long time. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Harry Potter and whether they really do.
Well, they're going to have to, because you say Stranger Things, the thing is, you've got kids in it, and that's, so it's you do sort of have to make it fairly quickly.
And that's the disappointment of this for me, which is that, not to sort of get into the critical side of it, but I do think that with the season, which I've watched what they've dropped so far, there's not really, they're still playing Dungeons and Dragons and riding around on their bikes. And it's kind of like, this is ridiculous. They're 10 years older and they look at, and I know that you can, and the same with Euphoria. I think there is going to be a time jump in Euphoria, but otherwise, what, she's going to have a mortgage and kids? I don't know. Zendaya's going to have, it's going to be a very different phase of her life. And it's difficult. Why these gaps happen? There's some sort of sense that it's some kind of mystical modern form of quality control because we live in an age of such amazing television that they can't possibly get it back that quickly. I don't think that's the case, because there's things like The Wire or Seinfeld or The Sopranos that didn't release like that and release. People literally can't remember what happened in previous series of things anymore, and they really can't. But equally, there are shows that have released on a really tight schedule, and I'm thinking about something like Slow Horses that my brilliant friend Will Smith did, but it is so punishing the schedule.
My God, that's crazy. It's amazing.
Will has left after season 5. It is so punishing, the schedule, because you're always in pre-production, writing and or shooting, or in post-production at any one time. You're doing sort of two of those things.
And also just on a contractual level, you have to have Jack Lowden, who everyone wants to be in everything. You have to have Gary Oldman. You have to have Kristen Scott Thomas. They have to be available for such a large part of every single year. It's very, very hard to release a big show once a year, and it's amazing that Slow Horses have done it. And it's not surprising that with Stranger Things, when you start out, you've essentially got some untried talent. Even the Duffer brothers, they're not, they hadn't really done an awful lot, which I can talk about in a moment. And so you can say, we're doing this, and then we're going to do season 2 or 3 back to back. But the second the first one breaks, everyone is getting offers from everywhere. Sure,
but you are but you will have it. They will have in their contract that they can, contracted for 7 seasons or whatever the sort of standard thing is.
And absolutely, by the way. But if you're Millie Bobby Brown, you can have that 7-season contract. But you are such a huge deal to Netflix that if you say after 2 seasons, I'm
doing Enola Holmes. I'm doing but you're doing it for them.
I'm taking 2 years off or whatever it is. There's not a lot you can do about it.
But this doesn't service the fans at all, and I do think that's interesting. The difference between TV and movies is that TV was a continuity medium. It was always on, and things returned. And obviously, we know in the old days in America they used to have like 22, 24 episodes or something, and they would release every year. But it's not producing what consumers want. It's interesting because podcasts, of which this is one of the always-on types, people always say to me, and do you even do it on holiday? It's like, yes, because that is really what people want. That's what people want, it to be available every week. People don't want there to be 2.5 years, 4 years between series of things they love that they genuinely can't remember what happens anymore. We now live in an era where there's a huge recapping industry, just people who basically just do
industry.
It's an industry, it's part of the entertainment industry, is the recapping industry, is people who do TikToks or YouTubes who are dedicated to it. I noticed, which was really interesting, that that Prime is now trialing an AI recap button. So you can get, you used to be able to get text recap, but now you can get AI video recap of a series. It's not just clips. The AI identifies kind of key plot points. Then it matches them to clips. Then it might even have soundtrack to the trailer rather than just bits of the soundtrack on top. Then it generates a voice narration. And Amazon say that will be theatrical quality. Samsung have now added Copilot to their TVs, which is a recapping thing. Recapping is so enormous, but it's not...
Skip recap.
Yeah, skip recap. Yes, but you wouldn't be skipping the recap when you're watching Stranger Things, because I watched every one of that last series. By the way, some of them, it was preposterous. They were all episodes that were over 2 hours long. Just the absolute high watermark of indulged creators thinking that they're making a feature, and actually, there's absolutely no way this episode needed to be, an hour 48, 2 hours 20. This is a nonsense.
This as a sidebar on recaps. Whenever there's a big crime novel that gets adapted for TV, and a lot of twists and turns and stuff like that, and I don't really know what you do about this. It's very hard, but AI certainly won't help. In any big crime story, there are the idea is you tell people who did the murder. It's the clues are all there.
Yeah.
But in the recap, you sort of have to put in things. Because you're hiding these things somewhere in inconsequential scenes, and suddenly in the recap you're thinking, why is this inconsequential scene with the shopkeeper in there? That's weird. Why is he going and buying a packet of Rolos? That seems weird. It. Yeah, and then you're like, oh, so that must be important. That shopkeeper must be important, and that's, I think, with twisty turny crime things, the recap industry is, I would say, an issue.
Hamstrung.
You are hamstrung, which, by the way, is my new detective, John Hamstrung.
I love him already.
Yeah.
And there is also a sense where these worlds have become kind of deliberately complicated and they're full of Easter eggs and all this sort of thing. That, there was some suggestion now that some TV critics were saying to people, can you tell us what happened in the Stranger Things play? It's like, oh, right, this is where we're going, is it? Which is the first shadow, which is like, okay, it's like that Marvel feeling where there was just so much homework, and if you hadn't watched WandaVision, then you didn't really understand the next movie. And we know with Marvel, they completely overexploited that aspect of things, and people are just like, I've had enough. There was too much TV. There was too much whatever. This is almost the opposite problem. Well, it's not. It's a slightly different problem. But people simply don't want this long between things, and it doesn't serve the fans. And actually, what a lot of other sort of producers are saying is this is just destroying. We spend so much money on this television, and people have really just got what they're not going to go back to it. They may not. Stranger Things is its own kind of giant phenomenon, and I'm not saying that this is the case here. I'm sure it isn't.
People are heading back to
There's
this.
a lot of great stuff that people just think, yeah, you know what? It's 2.5 years now. I don't think I'm going to get back into that one because a lot of other stuff's come along, and so we're killing some of our best stuff because we just can't get it out there in a manageable release schedule. And as I say, I don't think it's about television is so good now that that's the only way you can do it. I don't think that is the case. And there just must be a better way that serves the viewer, the consumer, better than this way. And
can I talk about this interesting thing of when you have an enormous hit and it goes away, how do you replace it? Because that's a particular issue. If you're on Netflix and something, you are almost punished for your success, because if you have, as you say, Squid Game or a Stranger Things, at some point they do have to come to an end. And how do you replace something that is so iconic and sits right on your homepage and that people are buying their subscriptions for? And the temptation has always been, let's try and copy Stranger Things, let's try and copy Squid Game. And then you realise, of course, what was Squid Game copying? Nothing. That came out of a clear blue sky. What was Stranger Things copying? Nothing. The Duffer brothers had made one movie. They made Hidden, which is a very good movie, but it's not. It's a low budget, made $300,000 worldwide. If you were thinking, okay, how do we have a definite juggernaut, definitive, absolute cast iron hit, you would not go to the Duffer brothers. But of course, that is the thing you do. And so you have to replace it by just having good people in good places looking for great creatives and trusting their instincts, right? You can't do you can't do copycat television, because all of their huge hits, perhaps Wednesday aside, come out of somewhere where you think, oh, well, that's completely unexpected. But it's every time one of these ends, people are sitting around going, we need $1 billion franchise here.
Yeah.
And $1 billion franchises are hard to come up with.
I completely agree. But as I said earlier, I do think there's just those in the vaguest terms, those elements, in the same way that we've talked about how young YouTubers or whatever are bringing people into these old formats like Dancing with the Stars or maybe even Strictly or whatever it is. I do think that having something that appeals to teens, and we know that kind of teen ensemble casts or people playing teens, credibly or otherwise, do appeal in that sense, and also that kind of that those very immersive worlds are particularly engaging and
very, very easy to get wrong though. Very, very hard to get right.
Easy.
Very, very easy to get wrong.
Yeah.
By the way, again, sidebar, Dancing with the Stars, the final was huge in America last week. So it just goes to show they're doing something very right over there. And how much did Stranger Things grow with its audience? Did it get more sort of horror based because the Duffer brothers come from a horror background, and suddenly they're making this thing that feels kind of pop culturally. But did it become scarier and darker as it went on?
Actually, it was much more scary and dark in terms of sort of in the first one. I thought more successfully almost, because it was almost like in Jaws, that just the hint of it and the upside down world and the kind of weirdly kind of the kind of ethereal grimness of it that you didn't understand. It's become more overtly horrible with characters like Vecna or what have you, who it's a much more obviously there's a much more obviously horror background there, and I suppose that grows with the audience. I do think, as I said, that it's difficult, that the characters really should be worrying about slightly different things now. And there have been sort of almost like deep plots about emergent sexuality and things like that. But it's kind of odd that they've preserved them in aspect.
You're in your early 40s now.
Yeah.
Come on.
I think we should have gone some slightly different
Someone should be saying,
here.
I just think reducing the ISA ceiling from 20,000 to 12,000. I just think that's it discourages sailing. Yeah. It discourages saving. I don't know what Rachel Reeves is doing.
Yeah, there's not one of those discussions.
Yeah. Anyway, on to something and someone utterly timeless. An absolute one-off, Tom Stoppard, who passed away last week.
This is such an enormous loss. It's such an incredible life he had. Most extraordinary playwright. I'll give a tiny little précis in case people aren't familiar with his work. But a lot of this is going to be a recommendation to familiarise yourself with his work, because he's so wonderful. He was born in 1937 in Czechoslovakia, and he was Jewish, but he didn't discover this until middle age, which is sort of very significant. And they've got out just in time. They fled for Singapore. Then he ended up in India a bit, and then his father died, and his mother married an Englishman who I think was slightly anti-Semitic, and they came here, and the mother very much underplayed the ancestry, so I think he thought he perhaps had some very distant Jewish relatives, and eventually he discovered the full story which is the most extraordinarily awful story, where almost all the other one of his relatives who had survived the Holocaust came and drew him a family tree, and all of the ends of the roads were in, Auschwitz and Dachau or on death marches. But he didn't know of any of this until middle age, and it's very interesting. And he was a news reporter in Bristol. He never went to university. He was the most extraordinarily clever man, beyond, but wore it so lightly. And it's really sort of fun that all the tributes have been from people like, Mick Jagger, saying, he was the best fun, because his mind was...
He was super handsome as well, wasn't he?
Oh my God.
Which I know is not important, but it's
nice to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice to have. Anyway, he broke out in 1966 with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, which is such a weird idea, but and just it's these two completely minor characters in Hamlet who we only sort of really know about because there's a line, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. It's just like a sort of uttered as almost as an aside, but he told their story and mashed it up with Waiting for Godot, basically.
Which is an incredibly modern thing to do, by the way. There's now lots of things that
are like that, but so much of that way of looking at things came from him, and I'm going to talk about something in a bit, which I thought was a coincidence. But it gave the king the perfect quotation. That line, there's a line in that: "Look on every exit as being an entrance somewhere else," and so that's the great line that the king was able to say to make comment on his death. But that's from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, because the full line was, we keep to our usual stuff more or less, only inside out. We do on stage the things that are supposed to happen off, which is a kind of integrity if you look on every exit being an entrance somewhere else. So it's like an inside out play. And it's completely brilliant and beautiful. But
so he's verbally incredibly ingenious. His ideas were incredibly ingenious. He could be funny. He could be smart. He did incredible things with language. He just did stuff that no other writer was able to do.
And Richard, when I was growing up, we never went to the theatre, nothing, we never did anything like that. And I came to his writing via the reading of it. And I would get these plays out from the library, and eventually, over the many years, I now own them all. And I mean, almost every line in these books is underlined by me, because which one don't you underline? Yeah. They're so, so good. And must have been, late into my 20s as to when I could first buy a ticket and go and see one of his plays. And I loved it. I loved him even more. The minute I read him, I came to him via reading him, and you can read the plays right now, and they are extraordinary. And of course, it doesn't take you long to read.
Where would you start if you were someone who didn't know him at all, or if you're a youngster who wants to write?
Well, I'd start with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and I'd read Jumpers, and then Arcadia. I mean, this is the thing. He taught me about these extraordinarily complicated things like chaos theory or moral philosophy or all of these sort of things.
Yeah,
but
so
he does
there's
it with
a lot of that in there with a very lightness of touch.
And it's a bit like reading a book like when Michael Lewis writes a book about money, and while I'm reading it, I'm like, I fully understand the most complicated financial instrument. And then, a few weeks later, you're like, nah, it's gone, completely gone. But someone once said to me, actually, about Tom Stoppard, I'm not so keen, because I think he makes people feel cleverer than they are. And I remember thinking, oh, you'd hate that, wouldn't you? People are just feeling that they actually are clever and that they can understand things simply because of the magical and funny way that Tom Stoppard... Sorry, what's wrong with that?
Yeah,
I remember thinking, this says so much more about you than me.
Exactly. You want to put references in that make people... You want people to be going away and looking stuff up.
Yeah.
And thinking the world is bigger than they thought it was before they started. That's a lovely thing to do whilst entertaining them, which was always his number one priority. Can
I just say, it's so he will always be so completely alive to me. And it's just odd, because when we were leaving here last week, I was going down the escalator at Embankment, and I thought, oh look, they're reviving Indian Ink, which is one of his plays, and it's got Felicity Kendall in, who was one of his great muses, and in fact they had a long relationship together. And I thought, oh, I must go and get tickets to that. But to show how alive he was, can I talk to you about two conversations I had last week? And bear with, because, okay, one of them was about, someone was saying to me, oh, have you met Tom Stoppard? And I said, well, I've had a couple of great letters from him, which are very much in my treasure box. But there's a Jumpers, his play, which is interesting. He wrote it in the wake of the moon landings, and he thought that what the moon landings signified was that it would cause some sort of great unmooring or kind of moral discombobulation amongst people, because this thing that they'd set up as this romantic trope, the moon, and it had always been this distant sort of sense of longing thing. If they knew that men had sort of trampled on it, that something would happen. Anyway, he gave an interview in which he said, and of course that didn't happen at all. I was completely wrong. And I thought it was so funny. Of course, it was so self-deprecating of him. And anyway, but not long after that, I read a interview with, I think, Buzz Aldrin, who said that, honestly, sometimes like at night, he'd be going out and putting the rubbish out, and he'd look up at the moon and say, I went there once. And I just thought, oh my God, that's so funny. That's so exactly what, to me, the normalisation of the fact that we went there is almost madder than the fact that we did. So I cut out this article and I sent it to him saying, I saw this and thought it'd make you laugh. And he wrote me back this really long and incredible letter. So I was telling someone about this last week. The other thing I was talking about, and I am going to land this plane eventually, but the other thing I was talking about was he wrote this brilliant play called Travesties, which I absolutely love. This is such a Stoppardian thing. I'm going to say Stoppardian. He discovered that in Zurich in 1917, both James Joyce, Lenin, and the Dadaist artist Tristan Tzara were all living in Zurich at that time. And Joyce was writing Ulysses. Lenin obviously had revolution on his mind. And Dada was this crazy new art form that was coming up. So he also mashed that up, very Tom Stoppard, with the importance of being earnest. And he wrote this amazing play. Anyway, last week I was listening to this interview with James Cameron, a fantastic, the director of, obviously, Terminator and Aliens and Titanic and Avatar and all of those things. And he's so clever. He's such a fascinating person to listen to, by the way. And in the course of this interview, he was asked a little bit about his relationship with Elon Musk. And he said, well, of course, we knew each other from the Mars Society in the 90s. And I thought, hang on a second, what's that? And I thought, I must get into this because I think that's fascinating. So I looked at the Mars Society, and it's in LA. It was founded out of this sort of underground movement who really believed in Mars exploration and colonization. And it's utopian and escapist and a kind of underground movement. And I thought, my God, well, that's so interesting. So in the 90s, he would have been on the, cusp of releasing Titanic, which would have been this kind of when he went stratospheric, James Cameron. Elon Musk was not really Elon Musk then. He had founded Zip2, which was kind of city guide, a mapping software.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, who else was involved in it? Because, of course, I was always looking for my third character.
Yeah.
And Buzz Aldrin. Now, Buzz Aldrin was huge in the society. And I was thinking, that's a fun sort of... But, of course, the fact that I can't hear an interview with James Cameron just mentioning that sort of association without going off down this imaginary side alley and thinking, oh, well, hang on, who else would have been there? And what would that have been like as a sort of play? That way of looking at the world completely was given to me by Tom Stoppard.
Yeah.
That's not a form of original thought. That's lock, stock and barrel. But it conditioned my thinking so much, I guess, because I read him at a particular young age. And so I always think like this now. And it's impossible for me to hear those kind of interviews. It's interesting. I thought, how funny that those are the two conversations I had last week. They're sort of, so typical because it's funny and it's fantastical. Both go so directly back to his plays. And in a weird way, maybe there's this linking figure in the personage of Buzz Aldrin. I can't really put my... Minute. It's just, anyway.
And so that play is called Buzz. And, also interestingly, he was, incredibly unsnobbish. And he did a lot of work in Hollywood. He wasn't one of those people who was too cool for school. He'd always get...
brilliant script doctor.
He'd always get his hands dirty. There's a story, it's absolutely apocryphal, but you can believe it, where on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they say, Sean Connery had said to Tom Stoppard, I need you to work on some of my lines because they're not very good. And so he'd had these amazing lines. And then Harrison Ford would come in and say, but sorry, why are your lines so amazing? And Sean Connery would say, well, because Tom Stoppard is writing them. And he said, well, could he write some for me? So Tom Stoppard starts writing for Harrison Ford. And then the next day, Spielberg comes in and goes, sorry, why is the script so good suddenly? And they go, it's Tom Stoppard. So he goes to Stoppard. Nonsense, because he'd worked with Stoppard on Empire of the Sun. And, he knows exactly what Tom Stoppard does. But, he would write on that. He did Revenge of the Sith. There's an amazing thing in that book that you recommended, the Ed Zwick book about Hollywood, where he's talking about Shakespeare in Love.
Oh, did you read that?
Oh my God!
It's so
well,
good,
I was rereading it yesterday for this. It's a brilliant book. It's really, really so.
Oh, I'm glad you read it. Readable,
and Ed Zwick's putting together this Shakespeare in Love thing with and so it's the only person who write this is Tom Stoppard. So he flies over to London to try and get Stoppard to do it. And he said, I had just the best day of my life. As I said, I went to see him. Stoppard wasn't particularly interested. But he said, let's go and have tea. And he describes him actually. He said, he's the most graciously well-mannered, self-deprecating, world-renowned genius I had ever met. That's a nice epitaph, isn't it? Anyway, so he has fun with Tom Stoppard, and he leaves at the end of the day and realises that Tom Stoppard has not said whether he would do it or not. But he's assuming he's not going to do it. But he's thinking, I got to spend a day with one of the greatest writers of all time, so I'm very happy. He then says, 3 days later, they get a message from Tom Stoppard going, oh yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I do. It seems like fun. And he's going, oh, that's amazing. He goes, but it'll be £1 million. And he's like, oh, no, well, I don't have £1 million. And then literally the next day, Julia Roberts says she wants to do the movie. And suddenly he does have £1 million. So he goes to Tom Stoppard, here's £1 million. Will you write Shakespeare in Love for me? And weirdly, that film has a very unusual gestation period, as you can tell, because Julia Roberts is not in it in the end. And it's many, many years later, and it's Harvey Weinstein at Miramax, and he fires Ed Zwick off it, and all of this stuff. But Ed Zwick is sort of back on board for when the Oscars come along. And Tom Stoppard, literally at the start of his speech, he turns away from Harvey Weinstein and said, sorry, Harvey, I want to thank Ed Zwick. And you think, well, that's nice. That's classy, isn't it? But, just somebody who can do the cleverest thing in the world, but also understands entertainment and also understands to, looking after people and that life and art is supposed to be fun.
I think that it's so interesting to think of Leopoldstadt, which became his final play. But I think people, all his entire career, felt that he hid himself within his writing and his own story. I didn't feel that ever, because I feel like his mind is in every single line, and that's the true thing, the mind, and it's all out there to see. But the story of that kind of a Jewishness that was concealed from him, and that he only discovered belatedly, he addresses in Leopoldstadt, which is his final play, which was extraordinary. And now I saw that just before it was directed by Patrick Marber. It was, it's got sort of 40 characters. It is extraordinary. And there's a character that's really very much Stoppard at the end of the play, and he who's sort of having to apologise for not really knowing and for just having this lovely English life and not being part of this charmed life. And he keeps saying, I didn't know. And then there's, as I say, the list of what had happened to all the other branches of the family. But funnily enough, I was able to talk to Patrick. I went to a shiva, with, the Jewish prayers after a death for somebody, and I was lucky enough to go back in a taxi afterwards with Patrick Marber, and we were talking about it, and I said, God, it meant such a lot to me. And it was also just before the pandemic when all the kind of lights went out. And he said, yeah, it was great in London, but it was extraordinary in New York. It was such a different feeling because that was so many people's story in New York. There's so many of the Jewish people in New York had that kind of story of having escaped in time, which was so completely particular. And he said, they really felt it in their souls there. And of course, it won, the Tony for Best Play in 2023. I mean, what a crowning sort of, to say, when people told him he never wrote about where he came from, which I don't think is remotely true, by the way, but to end with that and that to be your final play, I mean, it is a sort of perfect career in every sense. And I know that it's supposed to be absolutely amazing. Hermione Lee wrote a very long and amazing biography of him, which I have always been saving for when there was definitely not going to be any more of him. And so I'm going to read that now. And it's been really nice to talk about it today.
Yeah. And so no need to recommend anything this week other than get your hands on some Tom Stoppard.
Yeah. Read it, get tickets for it. I both have given me the greatest joy in my life.
Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground there.
We did.
We have a questions and answers episode on Thursday. Look forward to answering lots of your questions. We have, for our members, we have it's a look behind the scenes at The Lion King, which, by the way, has a lot in common with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the whole structure of the thing, and Timon and Pumbaa and all of that. Anyway, listen. Yeah. So we have that on Friday as well. Don't forget, send in your questions for Simon Cowell as well.
Please send in your questions.
To the rest is entertainment at goalhanger.com. We will ask him anything and everything.
Well, I think with that, it must be goodbye.
Yes. See you on Thursday, everyone.
See you on Thursday.